Okay, welcome back. Let's finish up chapter 1. This is going to be 106 Science 3. And we should be able to finish up the chapter talking about the biosphere. The whole surface of the Earth is the biosphere. Many interactions between these levels of biological systems. Each new level of complexity increases and novel properties emerge. And these emergent properties are due to a specific arrangement of interactions of many parts into an increasingly complex system, like the human brain, good example, have emergent properties of memory, of logical thinking. These are things that have come out of the organization of the brain, how the brain is organized. And this is also part of the structure and function. So there's zooming in at different levels of life on Earth. And we'll be starting with the next chapter on molecules and atoms, right? On the lower left. And then on to organelles, which are little structures within cells, until we get to a cell, which is the smallest thing, the fundamental unit of life, the smallest thing we can say is a living thing, is a cell. Cells make up tissues. We're not going to go too much into that. Tissues make up an organism, make up organ systems make up organisms. So we're not going to talk too much about the tissues and organ systems. We mostly talk about cells and jumping onto organisms and our populations and communities when we get into ecology, and then get into ecosystems and the biosphere as a whole. So the biosphere is composed of many different types of ecosystems, freshwater, saltwater, deserts, tropical rainforests, forests, so on and so forth. Okay. Life is distinguished by its unity and its diversity, hence the name of this course. Multiple lines of evidence points to life's unity. The similarities seen among and between fossils and living organisms. The common cellular processes, the universal chemical structure of DNA, how DNA is used by every organism on Earth to hold information on how to make and maintain that living thing. And that's because we all evolved, as I mentioned before, all evolved from the very first cells that arose on this planet. Later on, we may talk about how did cells arrive on a planet. Once they did, they evolved over the last 3.8 billion years. So we're going to look at the scientific explanation for the unity and diversity is evolution. How all living things, if evolution is correct, all, and most scientists think it is, all living things on Earth are related to all other living things. So I always talk about, so if you look at, I always use the example of the squirrel on the tree. So are you related to the squirrel? Yes, you are. And but are you related to the tree that the squirrel is on? Yes, you are, if evolution is correct. And what is, and then we talk about the degree of relation. How close are related to organisms? That determines on how long ago the common ancestor lived between these two organisms. So if you're related to a squirrel, there was a common ancestor in a distant past. And between us and a squirrel is probably about 100 million years. If we're related to a tree, there was also a common ancestor. Now remember, people get confused about this common ancestor. So you mean you had a mixture of a human and a tree together? No, it wasn't a tree, it wasn't a human, it was a transitional organism that had characteristics of both. And that organism probably lived more than 500 million years ago. Anyway, so evolution is the fundamental principle of life and the core theme that unifies of all biology. It is called now the synthetic theory of evolution, how all of information from genetics gotten by Gregor Mendel or the beginning of with Gregor Mendel, and the stuff by Charles Darwin works together, fits together so nicely that it just explains things so well. And that's the value of evolution. It just explains the quirky nature of life and how things came to be as they are. So the theory of evolution by natural selection, one principle that makes sense of what we know about living organisms. So evolution can help us investigate and understand every aspect of life, and therefore every biology student should strive to understand evolution. And you don't actually have to buy evolution. Say, oh, I think you just have to make sure you understand. You'll be asked questions about it, and whether you agree with it or not. And it's the only scientific theory that people are against for various reasons, I guess. Some people reject it on a religious ground. Other people reject it on the fact that it's really, really cruel and heartless, and human beings shouldn't be, couldn't have arisen by that. But and it's even asked among people. I remember there was this is a presidential election a long time ago, where all the Republican candidates were asked if they believed in evolution, and or did not believe in evolution, and only one person raised their hand that believed in evolution. But that was the wrong question in my mind. I don't believe in evolution either, because it's not a belief system; it's a system of evidence. The better question is, do you agree with evolution? Do you agree that this happened? That's the correct question to ask. And you don't have to agree with it at all, but you do have to understand it if you want to do well in that section of the course. So it came into focus in 1859 when Charles Darwin, and we're talking a lot about Charles Darwin, published a book called On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. He presented two main points in the book. Species living today arose from a succession of ancestors that were different from them in a process Darwin called descent with modification. And the process of natural selection is a driving force of evolution. Well, there are other driving forces of evolution. When we get into that chapter, and that'll be the last thing in the chapter, I think in the semester we talk about, along with ecology, is what natural selection is, leads to adaptability of organisms to their environment, because there are other forces in evolution that are more random, but natural selection is not random. Some people get the mistaken idea that, well, evolution is a random thing. How could you get this incredible complexity of organisms from this completely random process? It's not a random process. The mutations that make the raw material, the changes in organisms, those are random, but they are selected by a process called natural selection in the natural world that is really, really selective. So it's not random at all. It's the exact opposite of random. We'll talk a little more about how he really got his ideas about how organisms, because he was a creationist, and the creationist believes that all organisms exist at the same time, they were created, and they don't change in any meaningful way. He was a creationist also, but he started to look on his trip around the world that he took, and started to see this incredible variety, particularly in the Galapagos Islands, and he started getting the idea that maybe species change over time. So in the struggle for existence, and this doesn't apply to human beings for the most part, it's for a struggle for existence in the natural world. It's a real struggle to live, to find food, to find sexual partners, and very, very few individuals out there actually live long enough to find a sexual partner and make babies and pass on their traits. This is unequal reproductive success called natural selection. There are selective agents that, far more babies are born to wild animals that are going to survive. Something is going to kill them. what they call selective agents. Some are called biotic selective agents like predators and diseases. Some are abiotic, climate change or volcanic eruptions or tsunamis or whatever. So the natural selection selects only certain heritable traits from each organism that has helped this organism live long enough to reproduce and pass on those traits. So natural selection doesn't promote or somehow encourage changes. Mutations, errors in copying DNA occur randomly. Natural selection edits those changes. So some change occurred randomly in a newborn organism. It goes out in the environment and sees what happens to it. Mutations can be we fall into three categories. Neutral mutations don't have any effect on the organism. Deleterious mutations that hurt the organism make it less likely to survive, like all the genetic diseases, or actually beneficial, and those are the most rarest, and those somehow help the organism survive in the environment, adapt to its environment, survive long enough to find a sexual partner and make babies. So if those traits are inherited, they're more common in the next generation. This is how one generation changes from, each generation is different from the next generation because mutations have occurred in every generation and different mutations are selected and the other ones are killed off by the death of the organism. So the results of natural selection are evolutionary adaptations, inherited traits that enhance survival in that organism's environment. Like I said, we're going to see other mechanisms of evolution in the last chapters we discussed that actually are random and they don't help organisms adapt. But natural selection is the most important process of evolution because it helps organisms adapt to their environment. It's adaptable. The world is rich with examples of natural selection. Development of antibiotic resistant bacteria. This is one reason why we shouldn't overuse antibiotics. Antibiotics are good if you have a bacterial infection and you treat it with antibiotics. There are going to be certain bacteria that are resistant to it. You're going to kill most of them, but it's certainly going to be resistant. And then the next generation, those resistant bacteria will be more common than the ones that were not resistant to bacteria because they would have been killed. So each generation you get more and more resistant bacteria until the antibiotic doesn't work anymore. Same deal with pesticides in the field. Farmer sprays his field with a particular pesticide, kills off 90% of the pests, and you get a good harvest. Next, but the ones that survive will make babies and will pass on that resistance to that pesticide. So the next time you use the pesticide, it won't kill 90%, maybe kill 85 or 80%. And the next year, 70%, next year, 60%, so on and so forth, until that pesticide won't work anymore. This is evolution in action. This is natural selection in action. So here, we're going to review the 5 themes of biology: relationship of structure to function. Flippers are adapted to cruising through the sea. Information flow. DNA comparisons with other types of turtles reveal how genes account for the unique traits of each species. Pathways that transform energy and matter. A diet of many low nutrient foods result in slow growth. Interactions with biological systems. Changing global climate patterns affect migration routes and the growth of turtles' prey. And finally, evolution. Fossils indicate the shell evolved from expanding backbones and the ribs. Natural selection favored better protection, leading to the shell we see today. So let's ask some questions identifying these major themes. As global climate changes, green sea turtles may affect aspects of their behavior. Which major theme is illustrated by this action? Interactions within biological systems. They're going to have to interact with this biological system of global warming. And here's something else that a lot of people disagree with: global warming. Is it happening? We'll talk about that later on. It definitely is happening. But the controversy is, are humans causing? And can we do anything about it? All right. Although green sea turtles consume a lot of vegetation, they get few nutrients from each mouthful, requiring them to graze frequently. Which spatial theme is illustrated by this action? Pathways that transform energy and matter. They're eating mostly indigestible material, fiber, and we'll get into that later on also. And there's very little, if you eat grass or a seaweed, there's very little nutrient in that. You got to eat a lot of it to get enough to stay alive. By comparing genes between green sea turtles and humans, insight can be gained on how those genes encoded specific physical traits. This looks like evolution. And also interactions with biological systems. Each species on Earth here represents a twig in a branching tree of life that extended out from life first arising on this Earth about 3.8 billion years ago. That extends back in time to ancestral species more and more remote. Comparing DNA sequences with different species provides evidence of evolutionary relationships. Such evidence can be used to generate an evolutionary tree. People call taxonomists relate. You know, they put organisms in this tree of a relatedness. And they used to do it by just looking at the structures and the organs and of different organisms. Like, why would you think we're more related to a squirrel than the tree the squirrel is on? Well, we have a lot of things in common with squirrels. We have 4 limbs, we got a brain, we got a heart. The structures in trees are really different. So here's the thing. So the idea is that if we're more related to a squirrel than a tree, then if we compare DNA, our DNA with the squirrel DNA, it should be much more similar than our DNA is to the tree. So now they've, because you have all these mutations develop over time, and mutations always happen, and most of them are neutral. And so these neutral mutations build up. And so the more neutral mutations, so if you look at a gene that we have in common with a squirrel and we have in common with a tree, you look at how many neutral mutations that build up between our DNA and the squirrel DNA, it's like this many. Our DNA and the tree DNA, it's this many. And this actually is strong proof for evolution, because if they had been able to read the DNA and found out the opposite, then we would take in Darwin's idea, his theory, and thrown it out. A lot of people say, oh, it's not really a theory because it's not disprovable. It's absolutely disprovable. That would have disproved it. So species that are very similar share a common ancestor at a more recent point in the tree of life. That's, as I was saying before, how related you are to this organism, how long ago did the common ancestor live? The more recent the common ancestor lived, the more closely these species are related. The more distant the common ancestor lived, the more distant we're related. So we can set up trees like this. Mammals, we are mammals. Mammalian glands, we feed our young with a mother's milk, and reptiles. We're related to reptiles, but we're related to other mammals more closely than we are related to reptiles. And go down, and we're more closely related to a crocodile than we are to a leatherback turtle. We're more related to a green turtle than we are to a hawksbill or a loggerhead turtle, because the horizontal axis there is time. How long ago did that common ancestor live? Okay, so it's a partial tree, family tree of animals, and you can make it for all life on Earth. You can put it into a family tree. We're all in the same big family tree, and that's it for that. That's this will be 106 Science 3, and it's the last video for this chapter. So we'll head on out, and I'll see you in the videos in chapter 2. All right. So long for now.